This is the moment when everything changed. When these protesters brought down the statue of a 17th century slave trader in Bristol, they started an existential crisis for the country. Britain has revered its imperial heritage, but the monuments of this past now face an uncertain future. The statue of Edward Colston was thrown in the river. In London, the monument to plantation owner Robert Milligan was removed, and the mayors of London and Bristol suggested more may follow, as campaigns like Roads Must Fall called for colonial figures to be removed from their pedestals. All of this is powered by the growing Black Lives Matter movement, made up here of multiracial millennials and teenagers, forcing government to address historic racial inequalities and biases against Britain's black communities. There have been a number of reports into just this in recent years, which the government is now under pressure to implement.
I spoke last night to black community leaders, and they had a very clear message for the Prime Minister. Implement the reports you've already got.
I understand the very strong and legitimate feelings of people in this country at the death of George Floyd, and of course I agree that Black Lives Matter, and we are getting on with the implementation, and not just of the Lamy report, but also the report into Windrush.
It's not just the government facing scrutiny, but every major institution in the country. Today, the BBC hit show Little Britain was removed from streaming services. Channel 4 removed the show Bo Selector from their own too. Both had been criticised over their portrayal of black characters and use of blackface.
She done. All finished.
Meanwhile, in the US, the Hollywood classic Gone with the Wind has been taken off the HBO streaming service for perpetuating racial stereotypes.
Oh, Red, won't you please give me the money?
I couldn't give you the money if I wanted to. My funds are in Liverpool, not in Atlanta.
And Liverpool is where we're going next. A city built on racial inequality with historic ties to racism in the US.
You know, we're 5,000 miles from the American South right here, and yet we have a plaque to these individuals who fought, like I say, to ensure that people of African descent remained in slavery.
Lawrence is a historian researching this city's historic links to slavery. But where he believes most monuments should remain, this one commemorating Confederate fighters should fall.
One of the organisations that actually paid for this plaque were the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Now, if you go on the Southern Poverty Law Centre, which is the American version of Searchlight, if you go on their website, you'll see them listed as a neo-Confederate organisation.
So, I mean, you said before, I asked you, are you pro statues and monuments and plaques coming down or pro them remaining?
I'm nuanced. I think some should come down. I think most of them should stay up, remain and reinterpret. Because for me, these are the tools that I use to educate people. The public realm is without a doubt the best classroom.
No place in the UK has been transformed by the transatlantic slave trade like Liverpool. And like Britain's major cities, is reviewing who and how it remembers.
If we've allowed that, and I've allowed that to get past me, and we haven't dealt with it, then I apologise for that. It's not just about removing street names, it's not just about taking down statues. It's about putting right what's been wrong for decades, and that is removing institutional structures of racism, making sure that we actually deliver equality better within the city.
Is there institutional racism in Liverpool?
Yes. Yeah, without a doubt.
Today, the University of Liverpool announced plans to rename a building named after former Prime Minister William Gladstone due to his links and views on slavery, although for some, this is a step too far. These docks did not just transform this city, but this country and much of the modern world as the epicenter of the transatlantic slave trade. Not just a crime against humanity, but the foundation of modern capitalism and Britain's proud imperial identity, an identity now in crisis. Never before in the post-colonial age has the very essence of this nation been under such pressure to change.
Well, a short while ago, I spoke to scientist and human rights activist Professor Sir Geoffrey Palmer. He's Professor Emeritus at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, and I began by asking him about his efforts to get a plaque put on the statue of slave owner and one-time Home Secretary Henry Dundas, which stands in the very centre of Edinburgh.
On the plaque committee, we had individuals on it who did not want the word slave or slavery on the plaque. And the public asked me, what should they do to help with the plaque? And I told them to write to the council. They did. And the council leader declared just a few days ago that he will form a committee and will produce a draft for a plaque. And that draft will form a plaque for Henry Dundas' statue. And slave is on it, that Henry Dundas in 1792, to stop immediate abolition of the slave trade, actually said that the slave trade should be gradually abolished. And that was accepted by Parliament. And that delayed the abolition of the slave trade from 1792 to 1807, 15 years.
Even if you have statues amended by plaque, does history still record in a balanced way who they were? The danger, presumably, if you take them down, is that actually history forgets about them altogether.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. If you remove the evidence, you remove the deed.
You could argue that we haven't forgotten the Berlin Wall, despite the fact that it's been taken down.
The very fact that you've taken it down has, in fact, lost some of the history that is associated with it.
If I take you back to the mid-60s when you were active too, and therefore you have a very long span of experience in this, how does today contrast with the 60s? Have we learnt anything?
Now, when I was in London in the 60s, you know, I had to listen to Enoch Powell. What is very sad is that we still have the Powell-type prejudices. I've got two examples. And last year, I went to give a lecture in Edinburgh, and the young lady said, what can I do for you? And I said, I've come to give a lecture. And she said, what time? And I said, 2 o'clock. And she said, well, you can't be giving a lecture at 2 o'clock because that lecture is being given by Professor Sir Jeff Palmer. And the other incident was I went to an institution to charge my phone. And I said to the young man, could I go in and charge my phone? He said, do you know anybody in there? And I said, no, but I knew the previous boss. And he said, were you his chauffeur? And therefore, we are still in a phase where people do not understand their history in terms of the honesty of it. They see me still representing the slave